great to see some familiar faces, and it's great to see that we're adding to the numbers each year, so it makes us feel like we're heading in the right direction. So thank you guys for all your participation. Sorry about the false start this morning with getting in, so we're a couple minutes behind, so we're going to try to cut my speech down to 45 minutes or so. We're going to have lunch across the way at the Elks Club. At some point in time during the morning when you take a break, we'll talk with you about one of the selections to pick so they can have it ready for us so we can get through more quickly. If you choose not to go there, there are some places in downtown Southern Pines and of course over on Highway 1 and 5501, there's a lot of fast food places as well. But we will ask you to keep it to an hour if you can so we can keep on schedule. If you haven't signed up for golf yet, please do. Please let me know if you have any preferences of who you want to play with or anything like that. Please let me know that. We've got coffee in the back. I hope you found out already. We've got soft drinks back there. We've got snacks. And we're going to keep the day moving as much as we can. If you need to take a break, go ahead. There will be some breaks throughout the day. You'll see that on your agenda. Did I miss anything? We're going to try to move along as quickly as we can because we didn't get started a few minutes late. So we're going to move right to the first presentation, and I'll let Mr. Randall, our host, introduce that. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry about not getting in on time. One thing about lunch is they might not be able to accommodate all of us, so downtown is just a few minutes away. So if you see it's kind of busy in there, you might want to divert, go grab a bite, eat somewhere downtown, and then be back here. Our first two speakers are Mr. Robert Randquist, the immediate past president of the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, and Mr. James Hyler. There's the lunch menu. Guys, just so you, before you start talking, I want you to know what we're having for lunch. Chicken salad, club wrap, fried chicken. Okay. And Jim Hyler is the immediate past president of the United States Golf Association. And they're going to talk a little bit on the subject, brown is the new green, firm and fast, or is it something else? So please welcome up Jim and Robert. If the coffee doesn't work, that little siren will. Okay. Why this obsession with color? Golfers like to brag about the color of their golf course. They equate dark green with health. They take pride in saying that our course looks healthier than yours. They also complain about their courses. They compare some neighboring course from a distance, where indeed the grass always looks greener. Or they compare the course they played when growing conditions were ideal with the condition of their own clubs at times of stress when growing conditions are poor. That was a quote from the USGA Green Section Director back in 1977, Dr. Alexander Radko. So this whole thing about how maintenance conditions have gotten so refined in the last 15, 20 years, really we can start seeing some change back in 1977. So the race for color has had a solid impact on golf course management. It's time to get away from the manufactured look. Let's go back to emphasizing natural turf growth, to growing tougher grasses. Let's go back to playing golf on grass and not on color. Again, Dr. Radko, 1977. So there was a charge to stop progress as far as the emerald green look of things as far back as 1977. And then Mr. Hyler, when he took over as president of USGA, when it comes to the issue that is perhaps of greatest concern to golf's future, namely water, we must reset the way we look at golf courses. We need to understand how brown can become the new green. Many of the standards by which we construct and maintain our courses have become quite simply unsustainable. Something that most of us in this room know. This is our third year doing our symposium on affordable golf, and one of the reasons we have a mission statement, but this can be similar to our mission statement. I believe that our definition of playability should include concepts of firm, fast, and yes, even brown, and allow the running game to flourish. And so I asked Mr. Hyler to come and speak about that because some people sort of took a little offense to that, especially the word brown, and it's been a bit controversial. And I wanted Mr. Hyler to come talk about it a little bit. And Mr. Randquist, to talk a little bit about from his side of the perspective as the golf course superintendent. Because when we start talking about brown is the new green, we're talking about maintenance, and the golf course superintendent is the one that's on the front line with that challenge. So guys, Mr. Hyler, if you could start just by expanding upon your thoughts there, and then just give us a little background about how it went from there.
Okay, Richard, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here and have a chance to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, and that is the playability of our golf courses. So I'm a convert. Going back probably 7 8 years ago, I felt that our golf courses should be lush, green, finely manicured, etc. And through my involvement with the USGA, being chairman of the championship committee for 4 years before I was president of the USGA, I got to work with Mike Davis a lot on setup of golf courses, particularly for the US Open. I got to know these two guys right here, Pat and Chris, well, and a number of their associates in the USGA green section. And I got to work with a lot of great superintendents in setting up or preparing the golf course for the US Open. So as I began to learn more about the playability of golf courses, I began to realize that this whole concept of green, lush, finely manicured golf courses was just simply, one, not sustainable, in my view. It's not sustainable. And then secondly, it's robbing what I'll term the playability of golf courses. I'd love to go to Scotland and play golf, to Ireland, play those firm, fast courses over there. The more I go, the more I love it. And I think that's more how the game should be played. Less of an aerial game, more of a ground game. So anyway, all of that just sort of mixed together, came together, and when I became USGA president and gave my remarks at the Carolina Hotel in February of 2010, I really wanted to make this idea of sustainability, water usage, firm, fast playability really the centerpiece of my 2 years as being USGA president. So Richard, that's sort of a little bit of background as to how I came to talk about that. Actually, the reaction to that was much greater than I thought it would be. I think generally, if most people received it positively, I didn't get a lot of negative to it. I know some people said, well, what's this brown business? Well, it's just brown. I'm not talking about the golf course being brown. I'm using that just as a metaphor, really, for firm and fast. So I think the reaction has been overall positive, and hopefully we can begin to change the mindset of golfers, everyday golfers in this country, to get it away from the golf courses having to be green, use water, use a lot of fertilizer, etc., and think about them being firmer, faster. And if there's a little kind of brown in there, so much the better.
Yeah. Robert, will you
just give us a little perspective from the golf course superintendent's side on Mr. Hyler's comments and how you guys saw the charge as it moved forward?
I do, first of all, I want to thank you, Richard, for inviting me today. Jim, it's a pleasure to be able to stay with you. Thank all of you for being here. I echo Jim's comments about that. We had a lot of golf course superintendents that reacted very strongly to Jim's comments. They didn't call him, they called me and our staff at GCSAA to a large degree. He was gracious enough to communicate with a couple of them that I referred to him. And fundamentally, most golf course superintendents, the vast majority, agree with Jim's comments. It's really about the terminology and that strong use of the term brown. In Al Radko's comments, and Al was a wonderful gentleman, he talked about color shouldn't be the issue, but he never mentioned the term brown is beautiful. And that term, in looking back in some of the archives, started to pop up in the early 1980s, 3 or 4 years after Al Radko's comments. that brown is beautiful, and there was a certain segment of the turf industry that really tried to promote that particular phrase, brown is beautiful. I think we can look at the most passionate of people amongst our people who are most passionate about our environment and see that they even avoid this particular type of language. We talk about the green movement. We talk about the fact that it's not brown peace, it's green peace. Everyone on that side of the spectrum as far as philosophy goes has a strong opinion that green is equated with vibrancy or with life to a certain degree. So we have to be very cautious about how we apply this brown is beautiful. I'm absolutely in agreement with Jim. There's nothing wrong with golf courses being somewhat brown. But if we get them to a point where they're completely brown. I grew up in western Oklahoma, started playing on a 9-hole golf course that was totally unirrigated. I played for 6 months a year on a golf course that was completely brown in the wintertime and was probably brown for 40% of the time in the summer because there was no irrigation. I didn't think twice about that. To me, that was certainly acceptable. That was golf. 9-hole small facility in a very small town. But golfers over time have demanded from a marketplace standpoint that our golf courses be green. Did we go too far? I agree with Jim completely about that. Superintendents try to accomplish what the marketplace demands, and we still try to accomplish that to a large degree. The facility that I'm at now, Boca Rio, which is a high-profile facility in South Florida, we use 1/2 the water that we used 14 years ago when I first arrived there. And the way that we've been able to sell that is about what Jim referred to, playing conditions. What's really paramount, and I think that's what Al Radko was trying to say, what's really paramount is that we produce the best playing conditions. And that's firm and fast. From GCSAA standpoint, we would prefer to focus our discussions about this on sustainability. Because we talk about sustainability, all of their many definitions, we talk about it in terms of people, planet, and profit. The people have to enjoy the game. They enjoy a certain vibrancy to the golf course, not lush green. Can we educate them that it needs to be firm to provide the best playing conditions? Yes, we can. But it took us 25 years to get to this point. It's probably going to take another 15 or 20 to reverse that trend. But it's incumbent upon us in this business to make that effort to do that.
Now, in our introductory comments, we neglected to let some of you know what's great about the Symposium on Affordable Golf is I've got a bunch of questions here that I'm going to ask these guys, but I'm sure you guys all have questions too. And we have a lot of people in the audience that are just golfers, and that's important to this event. And this event is nothing but a discussion among 75 of us in years past, but hopefully by the end of the day, 100 of us. And it's a great open discussion, and I know those of you who've been here before will back that up. What I'm trying to get at is I want you guys to participate right now. If you have questions to ask, go ahead and let's start a discussion about concerns and issues that these guys can answer and on the topic. But one thing we do ask is just raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone over to you because we're trying to record our discussion. So the big question for me is how do we educate the public? What are some steps to educate the public as to this movement?
Well, as Bob said, this didn't happen overnight. And as I sort of think about where we are today, I think two things have really contributed to the mindset of golfers in this country that have green golf courses. One is the Masters. I call it the Masters effect. People see the Augusta National, they see what an incredible golf course it is, and probably the Monday after the Masters is the superintendent's worst day of the year. The members and players come back to their club and say, why can't our course look like that? So the whole notion of golfers seeing golf courses on television and then expecting the same kind of conditions that their courses had an impact. Secondly, in this country, we have so many real estate developments that are centered around golf courses and the necessity of selling lots and selling homes. and having those golf courses to be green and lush and finely manicured has been an important part of marketing real estate development. So I think those two things over the last 25 or so years have really had an influence on golfers' mindsets about what the golf course should look like. So, Rich, when I made those comments almost 3 years ago, I knew felt like that was hopefully a beginning of a dialogue to where people could begin to talk about, one, the sustainability aspects of a lot of water, a lot of fertilizer, and then secondly, begin to talk about the playability benefits of farmer golf courses. At the USGA, in 2010, the US Open was at Pebble Beach, and we really had that golf course firm, really firm. And it was brown. The fairways had a real brownish tint to them. The greens had the Poana greens there had a real, they were really looked ugly on television, but they were fine. The U.S. Amateur in 2010 was at Chambers Bay. And Chambers Bay, the entire golf course is a fescue golf course, tees, fairways, roughs, greens. And I tried to see what the color, probably close to Rich's suit. The entire thing was brown. And firm, I mean, you can't imagine how firm that course played. So we're trying to do things in our course setups to emphasize firmness. And hopefully it can be a trip, and over time people can, one, appreciate the sustainability issues around water usage, fertilizer usage, mushness, and secondly, can begin to understand the playability benefits of a firm golf course.
About what does the golf course superintendent at a private country club respond with when his greens chairman comes to him and says it's not green enough, yet he's trying, the superintendent, he or she is trying to promote the fast and firm look? What are some of the ways a golf course superintendent can present this to the membership, and what are some of the ways a greens committee chairman can present it to the membership?
I want to make one comment. Jim, it was interesting when I was on my way back from the Open at Pebble Beach, my green chairman called me when I was in Kansas City, and the first words out of his mouth was, what was wrong with the greens at the Open there? And I explained to him the firmness aspect and the fast part of it, and he's a very good player. Richard, in regard to your question, I tell you what's helped superintendents a lot, or is helping them in this regard, is the fact that we are faced with ever increasing water restrictions and availability of water and the amount that we can use. In South Florida, you would think where we get 65 inches of rain a year that we would not ever worry about water shortages, but that 65 inches can come in very brief, intense periods a lot of the years. And our primary water source for irrigation, the water comes from Lake Okeechobee. When that lake is low, we begin to experience water restrictions from the South Florida Water Management District. We had 2 periods of that in the last 5 years where our water usage was mandatorily reduced by 45%. Those were great occasions to teach our membership that a golf course that was 60% green and 40% brown played with better playing conditions than a golf course that was lush green. They learned that the ball rolled further. They learned that the ball bounced truer. They learned that they could play run-up shots into the greens. And since that time, over the last 5 years, my membership has become much more receptive to those slightly brown areas, some off-color areas, because they recognize that that enhances the playing condition of the golf course. That's probably been the best teaching device that we've had. It's been forced regulations. We can certainly teach our superintendents that it does provide better playing conditions. But I also want to caution, say a word of caution about this. When we go to extremes, like US Opens, PGAs, I've been to a good number of them over the years, that type of ground is not sustainable long term. You're going to see, I was at the PGA this year, for the Ryder Championship in Chicago at Medina, And I counted, as my wife and I walked around late in the afternoon, 30 employees that were hand watering roughs and fairways late in the day. For the average golf course, that is not affordable nor sustainable. So superintendents are caught in a quandary. They have to use the limited resources they have from a labor standpoint, from irrigation systems that may not be the most precise in regard to application rates, and try and balance, come to some middle ground where there is an acceptable level of green that's so the turf can be sustained over a period of time, can have enough growth to withstand the traffic that's there. Jim Moore with the USGA used to make a great comment, Jim, that I heard a number of years ago. The fastest greens are the ones that we kill right after we kill them. And they absolutely are. They're the firmest and the fastest. But from a long-term standpoint, that's not sustainable golf. And so we are caught in a quandary. How do we educate people? We have to make a diligent effort as USGA, as superintendents, even as golf professionals. I'm going to say, am I running on too long here?
No,
One more comment that really disturbed me, I have to tell you. 3 years ago, I believe it was, I was in Jacksonville at American Society of Golf Course Architects meeting there. Tim Fincham was presented with the Donald Ross Award and had a question and answer period. There were 2 architects over a 15-minute course of time that asked him about the tour's response to this very question, allowing golf courses to not be quite so brilliant green, but to be browner and firmer. And Tim's response both times was, well, we have the best players in the world, they demand the best conditions, and that's what they're going to get, which at that time meant green. Now, I'll give the tour credit. They have backed off of that some in the last 2 or 3 years, and they're beginning to promote firmer, faster, more tolerant of green or brown conditions at certain times. But I would add to those 2 sources that you mentioned that the tour has been a challenge in this regard too.
No question. Just a quick follow-up. I totally agree with Bob. In no way would I ever advocate a golf course to try to be as firm as Pebble Beach was in 2010. I mean, that's for 1 week. It's for the national championship. But there's got to be a balance, a better balance between lushness, green, and firm and fast. And to try to find that balance is what we're talking about.
At what point, Bob, in your career, did you see where we were hitting this threshold of too much water and too green?
I think it was in the late 60s, early 70s. Richard, as golf really became popular on television with the Palmer, Nicklaus, and Player era, that's when I saw that. And the other thing that I tie to that is the time frame in which golf courses began to add automatic irrigation systems at a very fast pace. And as we added all these high-tech, or even low-tech at that time, automatic irrigation systems, superintendents and memberships, or public facilities also, for the first time had the ability to deliver water to keep the golf course green most of the time. And that's really the time when I saw this come to be.
Jim, how about you? You're a golfer from Southwest Virginia, originally the Roanoke area, is that right?
Southern Virginia.
Southern Virginia, okay, that's all right. How about you from a playing standpoint? Where did you sort of see that same threshold?
Late 60s, early 70s. I played in Winston-Salem for 10 years, played a public course, a really good public course, and I mean, in fact, I said that for PGA, I think it was great golf course. But there, it was still beginning to use a lot of water. Then I think that trend escalated, and I come back to the real estate development impact. I don't think that can be understated, the impact that golf course communities have had on this notion of green golf courses and trying to sell the real estate. So I think if you think about the number of new golf courses that were open starting in probably the early 80s through the middle 90s, but really for 20 years, and how many of those were centered around real estate developments and the impact of that.
I think also, Richard, there was a parallel here. You know, when I was a kid growing up in western Oklahoma, no one irrigated their yard. you barely even fertilized your lawn. You know, it was just, you mowed it when it needed mowing, and because it was a prosperous time in the life of our country, people had more to spend, cash to spend on things. They began to take, there became a philosophy that these type of manicured lawns were a beautiful thing to have, part of that residential development that you're talking about. So all these things work together to promote this concept of this lush green. And the economy right now is dictating that we get away from a certain amount of that, and I think that's a healthy thing for us.
Jim Lewis, let me get a microphone.
I have a comment and a question. I'm going to ask the question first and then make a comment. It seems to me that the television commentators on the tour events have a lot of influence on the way golfers think. For example, they can declare an average golf course great, and all of a sudden it's great. To what extent, if at all, has USGA in particular made any attempt to try to get the TV commentators on board with regard to promoting the idea of firmness, in particular firmness and fastness? It seems to me that now that's my question, my comment is that most golfers, the most important thing in the world for golf is how far they hit. And on tour, we observe how guys hit a long way. And it's usually, among other things, attributed to their equipment. Very often, not much is said about it. They're playing on golf courses with a whole lot firmer than we play. And if you want to hit it further, play on a firm golf course. We have 2 courses at my club. Usually, when we oversee one, we don't oversee the other. I like to play the one that's firm because I'm a short knocker and hit a good brother.
I'm getting shorter every year.
So back to my question, has there been any attempt you know of to try to influence the way these guys?
No, I mean, the USGA, our broadcast contract is with the NBC, and the U.S. Open, starting in 2010, at the U.S. Open, we actually ran what I thought was a fantastic PSA. It was about, I'll say, Chris, a couple minutes long, talking about water usage and dialing back water and fertilizer. It was a wonderful PSA that spoke to that. And then in my little brief segment on the broadcast, that's what I talked about. But the announcers are not going to get into that. You know, Johnny Miller and Dan Hicks, Gary Cook and those guys, they might talk about how firm the golf course is, but they're not going to editorialize that that's good or bad. It's just, this is the way it is. I think the tour guys largely playing what I'm going to call an aerial game. I mean, they hit it so far, they hit their irons so far. It benefits them to really have a little bit softer golf course because they're hitting it like this. You go over to Scotland, you go to the Open Championship, and you see the European players, they've got the ball on the ground. They're playing run-up shots, they're playing it on the ground. It's a different style of play. I had at Royal St. George's last year, I was lucky and was the rules official in Darren Clark's group the first round. And I could tell he really was on his game, particularly the way he was playing around the green. And he would have a 50-yard shot into the green, and he would hit a little 7-iron, and he would just bump it right in, hit it 20 yards down the fairway, and then tumble, trickle up around the hole. And just to watch those European players play on firm and fast golf courses over there is really a joy to see, and it requires shot-making skills. And American pros, I don't think, have the same level of shot-making ability because they're playing an aerial game.
Well, most of our courses in the last 30 or 40 years have been designed to promote aerial games.
No question.
So you don't have a lot of run-up shots available to.
That's exactly right. Point taken. Yeah.
I agree that the only way that I've been able to sell my members again on this firm type approach is to sell the concept that the ball's going to roll a lot further. And I have members now that actually will begin to chastise me if they're not getting rolled and say, why isn't the golf course firmer? And I'm usually pretty responsive to that, although sometimes it's because of the impact of recent rainfall, there's not much we can do about it. One of the real advances in the superintendent's world over the last few years, though, has been an increased level of fairway top dressing with sand, which has really helped to promote that firm and fast type of play. I want to give you a second analogy in a sense, or something close related. Let's talk about bunkers. And that's one of my areas that I do a seminar on, so I talk a lot about. The tour players, what do the commentators say if a tour player hits the ball and the ball gets a very light? What's the commentator's response? This is awful. This guy's screwed here because of where he wound up here, because the golf course wasn't set up right for him. No, it's not. It's a hazard. It's golf. And Jim is right. One reason that I'm absolutely convinced, and this is not original with me, it's been expressed in other quarters, certainly by golf writers and others. The European players, one reason that I feel like they've been so successful in the Ryder Cup is because when they get a bad lie, they're used to bad lies in fairways, they're used to bad lies in roughs, they're used to bad lies in bunkers in their native country. When they get a bad lie, they look at it as an opportunity to be creative and to come up with a great shot. American players are spoiled. They're used to perfect bunker conditions. They're used to perfect fairway lies. They're used to good lies in the roughs. And they're not used to dealing with the adversity or having to come up with the creativity to play those kind of good shots. And I'm a firm believer that if we have firmer, faster golf courses, bunkers that truly become hazards again, that we would be getting back to the sense of what golf is really about. But more importantly, and I spoke at a conference in Canada about bunker maintenance, and I made the comment that roughly 20 to 25% on highly maintained golf courses or highly manicured golf courses, 20 to 25% of the labor that is devoted to maintaining a golf course is devoted to maintaining bunkers. That sounds high, but that's true. I've done the data search to find out. A week later, I read quotes, some of them on Golf Club Atlas, which I thoroughly enjoy and lurk on constantly, and actually have some of my material printed on that website. I saw a quote from someone, an architect, who said, well, they said half of the budget, the golf course budget, or 25. That's not true. It's the labor budget. It was extrapolated way out of context, but nonetheless, to think that we spend 25% of our time maintaining bunkers, a hazard, it's crazy. That's not sustainable over time. If we want to get back to sustainability at lower cost, let's maintain bunkers as hazards again. If you get a mediocre line of fairway, learn how to hit the shot.
Just one quick comment, follow-up. The Carolinas Golf Association has some agronomists that works with them. Jeff Nance is back in the corner there, who's the director of the CGA, Dr. Leon Lucas. And Leon and I were talking one day about sustainability. He said, Jim, you know, if you take a golf course maintenance budget, he said, probably the last 20% of that budget is spent on appearance. It has nothing to do with playability. It's spent on appearance. And think about the money that is spent just to make it look good. No impact on playability.
I agree.
I think that's a great way to look at it.
Follow up on this. We lived in Chapel Hill for a good while, played a course called Colors Love. Nichols course is 25 years old, and it's the epitome, I think, of what you all have said. And the thing that disturbs me a little bit is that course didn't lend itself to running up on the green. I mean, the design of the course around the green was that probably only 4 or 5 holes could you actually run a ball on the green. You had to fly it on the green. Now, if you go to this ground here, which I don't disagree with, I do think the marriage between golf and real estate was an unfortunate marriage. How do you deal with that problem? Where you have to carry this green because there's something between you and the green, a hazard or whatever.
Well, to me, it's still firm and fast is the right approach. Even though it is an aerial game, greens can be firm without being rice pads. Fairways that are firm are going to promote much better roll, which for the average player, which I certainly am, I appreciate being able to roll the ball further. It's going to be very difficult from an architectural standpoint to put the genie back in the bottle. I don't think we're going to see, and I'm going to make a comment about that too. I'm going to tell you something, in Golf Digest and all the other publications that golf is involved with, what sells is what I call visually dynamic landscapes. In other words, you have great contrast because of extreme elevation changes, extreme bunkering or whatever. That doesn't necessarily make for good golf. But to the general public, for some reason, it seems to sell very well. It has a certain appeal to it. Can we get architects, Richard, to resist that temptation to design golf courses that way, or to modify existing golf courses to a point where they're not worried? They're worried more about shot values than they are about the visual appearance of the golf course.
Yeah, actually, Ed, I thought that was a question that was going to be directed towards me more than these guys, because it's architects that have to answer that. And I know two guys in the like Newsman and myself, we will have no problem with that. We're not interested in a genie. And ironically, Ed, you mentioned Golf Club Atlas, and Ed's question was architecture. Ed's son was the founder of Golf Club Atlas, ironically. But I agree. A bunch of architects, just in the first week in October, a bunch of the ASGCA members, and there are about 40 of us, about 12 superintendents from Australia, 15, and then another 25 from Europe, all convened on Long Island. And we got to play 4 golf courses up there. We played Bethpage Black, National Golf Links, Maidstone, and Baltusrol Lower in northern New Jersey, back to back to back to back. It was a great experience. But Bethpage and both Bethpage and Baltusrol were set up for a U.S. Open. The fairways at Bethpage were 25 yards wide, and the rough was 4 inches deep. And until that day, on the second hole that we played, one of the architects I was playing with said, "What's your favorite golf course?" And I said, "Well, up until about an hour ago, it was Bethpage Black because of its conversion. But we got to go see National Golf Links, and we got to go see Maidstone, which fast and firm. Brown is beautiful, and holes where you can run the ball up. So I think that architects will be forced to change their thought process, but unfortunately, not to let them off the hook, but it's the client a lot of times that is interested in rankings and ratings and selling lots. Hopefully, now the residential thing will go away, but you still have the challenge of how do you make your golf course pretty enough to be in Golf Digest.
Well, think about Jack Nichols when he designed that golf course. He hit high things.
Right.
So a lot of his early to middle work was really that development and designing that kind of golf course. I think his later work, he got away from that a little bit. But to speak about one of Richard's peers in the architecture business, Gil Hint. If Gil got the job to design the course for the Olympics in Rio, and Gil is very much a sustainability proponent. And I think the work that he'll do down there, and the coverage and the publicity that golf course will get, will do a lot to talk about sustainability.
Hey, one question kind of about that situation. I was surprised, she talked about sustainability within golf. If we went to Rio de Janeiro and built a golf course with the Northern course there, why not use one that was currently there and enhance what that was to become a better golf facility that would have allowed the best in the world?
Yeah, good question. Two things. One is that's a private club there in Rio, and to make that golf course even remotely playable for the world's best players, it would have been materially redone. And one big part of the Olympics is what they leave behind for facilities. And this new golf course will be left behind as a public golf course in Rio. And that was a big part of the decision to build a new golf course. Is it be available to the public to play where the other course would not?
Gordon, go ahead.
Yeah,
truly great courses for these jobs. The members of those courses are educated themselves on what those golf courses should be like. So there's pressure there. It's recognised that there are basically two games of golf. There's a traditional game and there's this new game. Those traditional clubs protect themselves from the very pressures that you guys are talking about. So I think it is that education that we get into the actual golf themselves as a display for them, that they've got something special and they need to look after it. I mean, it's sort of like, I want to pick up there at the end. I don't remember that round as beautiful thing. It was 45 years when you guys were saying green is not great.
Well,
And I think there's something difference in that. I remember reading that Al Radical one was green is not great, which made a lot more sense than brown was beautiful. Because for us, the whole thing of the things green, brown, or whatever, we just work with the stress of golf courses. And that's the only interference that we do. Just stress management.
and I agree. The brown is beautiful was advanced by some people at times. I've yet to see that term. I went back and did some research in the early 80s, really. And again, Al Radko's comments did not use that phrase. And I think that's why some of our members were somewhat offended when Jim made his comments. And Jim realized that, I think, fairly shortly after that. That's what I'm saying. We have to be careful about our semantics, about our language, about how we describe things. And we're, as an organization, GCSAA is more focused on that term of sustainability. To the USGA's credit, our organization, numerous other organizations just signed an agreement about policies on sustainability that is international in nature when they were over in Turkey here a couple of weeks ago. And I think we're working the right direction. But we really want to focus that about sustainability and playing conditions. Playing conditions is what's really important, that they be most conducive to fair and good play of the game. And I have never been a proponent of that brown is beautiful, but I've certainly heard it preached from certain segments of our industry over time in the last 20 years. It has never been accepted by either our industry or by the golfing public as a whole. And Jim did not make the comment in his defense, brown is beautiful. He just said that it could be part of the new green. And it is part of the new green, but we have to be very careful about how we state that and how we define it.
Yeah, I think for us, we certainly recognize that there are times in the season when that is the natural colour of our courses that they should be brown. So, we don't define the colour as being beautiful. We just say it's the season and that's the way those courses go, and that's the way they should be celebrated. So I try to stay away from that definition of colour defining the great golf course.
The initial use of that term, oddly enough, when I went back and researched, was used 3 or 4 times in articles, both in the Green Section Record and other publications, in regards to dormant Bermuda grass fairways in the wintertime, in the discussion about whether to overseed or not. And people who were proponents of not overseeding used that terminology, brown is beautiful, to describe dormant Bermuda grass being beautiful in the wintertime. That's how I got started.
One comment about the courses and clubs in the UK and the golfers educating themselves and respecting history and tradition and so on. I think that's much more true in the UK than it is in this country. Yeah. I think Richard talked about Maidstone and Nashville up on Long Island, and they're two courses that certainly are very protective of their heritage and the way those golf courses have evolved over the years. And two great examples of sustainability, and particularly Maidstone, very limited irrigation, incredible golf course, really incredible course. So you make a great point there about golfers themselves understanding what they have and really working to protect it.
And Maidstone's fairways are not irrigated. And Cal Bigelow would be happy with me and Mike Mintola about me taking pictures of grasses. I felt like a turf student there. I was taking pictures of the fairways and the greens and the patchwork of the different colors. And the playing surfaces were fantastic. So, and they don't have fairway irrigation. George Fisher's not here, too bad he can't hear this, but he wouldn't like that. Chris?
I think sometimes, Scott,
I think sometimes we get caught up in the terminology, and something like that, a statement that's well-intentioned, like brown is beautiful, can get misconstrued or altered in somebody's mind, and next thing you know, it's like off on the side somewhere. It's like, wait a second, that's not really what I was intending that to be. To Ed's point, I think that's been part of the problem is, like in the UK, golf is a way of life for people over there. So inherently, those that are really ardent golfers, even in the small villages, they have a very deep understanding of kind of what should be. Here in the States, we have such a variety of different types of golfers that I think it's a little harder sometimes for us to get a universal message across. But I do think most of the entities in golf are in the right direction. It is disappointing to me that the tour, and again, a lot of times the average golfer, they're looking to the supreme demonstration of the game as an indicator of what's good, what's bad, what's whatever. And while I understand that commentators can't totally give their own opinion, they clearly have an opportunity to influence there. And I think as a journalism major and all, we do have to have some integrity. But let's face it, a lot of times I think some of the things I hear on those commentators, comments on things, frankly, amount to drivel. So whereas you have something that could really be a benefit to the game, that has a place. Maybe it has to be properly presented, but I think that's important. And I would say the UK, although sometimes I think they're even a little guilty of some of the things that maybe we should improve on, they kind of slip into it. I think the more that we get to, like we were talking about, efficiencies, reducing stress, I think the way we get language around that, that's really the message, because we need a more resource-conserving game. That's the way the rest of the world is going. We certainly have to be a part of that solution. I do think the game's heading in that direction.
One comment. When I made the comment, brown becoming green, I mean, that was more, I hate to say shock value, but that was trying to get people's attention. All right, so people were talking about it, what's the old word, the advantage of people talking about it, I mean, there's something going on there. So even though there was some negative reaction to the words, it was trying to get people to say, okay, let's step back and think about this a little bit. Let's think about our water usage. And that's really what that comment was about. It was about water usage. How much water we put on golf courses in this country. My view is that we generally overwater golf courses in this country because we want to have green golf courses. So it was a word, 2, 3, 4 words there that was aimed at trying to get people's attention and start a dialogue about dialing back the water.
Jim, literally I have your back on this because the quote's right behind you when it refers to water.
Yeah.
So, we talked about, Jim Lewis had mentioned about how he likes firm and fast. I'm a short hitter too, I like firm and fast, but the pros need that little bit more of cushion. And the challenge is, Jim, you got something?
Yeah, let me jump in right there a second. So you're leading into an issue that we could spend 2 or 3 days here talking about, and that is distance. The whole distance issue, how far the golf ball goes. Where has technology gotten this game to demand that Hyler's number 2 the 7,450 yards, 7,450 for the 2014 Open? What in the world is going on to cause us to do that, and the cost associated with maintaining all this real estate? The whole distance issue is one issue that I think you will begin to see it talked about in the not too distant future.
Good.
Sorry.
That's okay. And I wasn't going down the distance.
Okay.
But what I was going to say is, my first U.S. Open that I ever was at was the 1984 Open at Wingfoot. And the events in the 80s and parts of the 90s were really defined, the U.S. Opens were defined by very narrow fairways and very deep rough. And really since Mike Davis took over his course setup, that's improved. I guess Mike is giving us a way to challenge the best golfers in the world, but how else can we challenge the best golfers in the world other than with narrow fairways and deep rough?
Well, I think Rich, at the US Open, starting in 2006, we actually dialed back the rough, had graduated rough. The further a player hits it offline, the more penalized they are. And what Mike is after, particularly that first primary cut of rough, is to have an inconsistent rough. So when the player walks up there, it's not just a chop out. They've got to look at it, think about their lie, think about what's in front of them. And if they happen to catch a halfway decent lie, they have a chance to advance the ball somewhere around the green. And actually, in some of the roughs that we've had for the US Open, players that go for the green wind up having a worse score than they would if they played the thing conservatively. And we like that. We want to give players choices. So I think that the way the golf course setup is evolving for the Open is less rough. Actually, a variant for next year, the fairways are going to be wide, where the members play. And we want to allow the players to show their shot making skills. But on a soft golf course like Congressional last year, they're going to shoot lights out. Firm golf course like Olympic this year is much more a challenge. So a whole lot around the US Open has to do with how firm the golf course is.
Can I speak to this? I agree the USGA has made some good changes, and then you took the words right out of my mouth about inconsistency. The players, when I was young and playing, we didn't fertilize roughs, we didn't do anything to them. They were as inconsistent as they could be. You'd have deep areas, you'd have shallow areas of grass that weren't as tall. We have changed since those 60s and 70s to have very consistent rough by fertilization, by more intensive turf care. That's what's been demanded of us. But bringing that inconsistency back into it is the thing. The two things that I've said for a long time have contributed to better scoring conditions for the players, but beyond equipment and the fact they're more physically fit, or the fact that bunkers are maintained so intensely, they get very consistent lies there, and the fact that greens are so much better quality than they used to be. From a smoothness standpoint, from a speed standpoint, if you want to make golf courses more challenging, get inconsistent roughs, make the bunkers hazards again, where players fear going into the bunkers rather than, right now, I've seen it. I had 2 majors at Southern Hills when I was there, a couple of tour championships, and I saw the players would literally be pleading with the ball to go in the bunker rather than get stuck in the rough around the green somewhere. That's crazy. And yet we prepared bunkers the way that we were asked to prepare them. And secondly, go back to slower green speeds, and this is heresy with these guys, and greens are not as smooth. If you do those 2 things, the game will be harder and more challenging again. Not that I'm advocating bumpier greens again, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But these scores have become because greens have become ultra smooth and the players have confidence that they can hit the ball on line, read the putt's going in the hole. They don't have to hit a forceful stroke to do it. Even when they go to Britain now and play at other locations where greens are slower, how do our players respond to that? They're not particularly happy about it because the greens might not all be the same speed. That's golf. So what if one green's 10.5 and one's 12? It's up to the player to figure that out. And yet I would be willing to bet that most of us would not be proponents of that kind of an approach. And yet that's what we used to have. And it made a difference in the difficulty of the golf course.
Good morning. My name is Cale Bigelow. I'm from Purdue University, and Rich is not her student, or her.
I didn't want to go that far, really.
Well, you are what you are. Question for you, Mr. Randquist. One of the things you mentioned was that you were able to reduce water use by 45% in the last 14 years. I think one of the things that golfers may understand is economics. And one of the things that we've certainly talked a little bit about is the playability of these firmer and faster golf courses. But what kind of things have you seen in terms of possible maintenance reductions by maybe not keeping the golf course as wet as it once was? One moment on that. And the last thing I'll say is, I think all of us would agree that certainly probably less water on the golf courses is an appropriate measure to take going forward. But I also would caution the idea of suddenly just turning off the water. Because there's probably a lot of golf courses that excuse me, have evolved, the species have evolved and started to become grasses that prefer more moisture. So we simply can't just turn off the water and suddenly everything's solved. So.
No, I agree with that. I didn't just reduce water instantly. It took me about a year to get water rates down by that 45 to 50%. Less fairway mowing. We try and maintain just enough growth on our fairways to keep them healthy, in other words, so that you're getting fairly good playing conditions. But we mow fairways less than what we used to. We don't fertilize fairways as much as we used to. We've all cut down on the amount. The beauty about firm and fast golf courses and dry golf courses, much less disease problems, much less insect problems. They were treating fairways occasionally with fungicides when I first arrived there. I haven't put a fungicide on a fairway in 12 years now. So these things are good for healthy turf long term. But you can't get there overnight. You do have to sort of work the turf into being conditioned in that particular regard. I do think the economy in South Florida, I can't speak for the rest of the country. In South Florida, I've spoken to a tremendous number of superintendents in the last 4 years since the economy turned sour. The average reduction in golf course maintenance budgets in South Florida, private, public, both, is around 24 to 25% over the last 4 years. At my club, we're spending 18% less than we did 4 years ago. And it has forced us to be more innovative in the way that we deal with native areas, for instance, where we used to do a lot of handwork. Now we've come up with some decent chemical solutions to keeping some of those areas clean. We don't rake bunkers as much. We might rake them 5 days a week now instead of 7. We've reduced in a number of areas, and we've reduced our labor force from 22 people down to 17 people over that 4 years. So we have, most golf courses, at least in Florida, have made significant reductions in these last few years. And from what I've heard, I suspect that that is the case around most of the country. But we were forced to do it, I'll be honest, we were forced to do it by a poor economy. It's been good for us. We've gotten back to being more efficient with the way that we do things and being more productive. And that's been a healthy thing for the game of golf. And more affordable.
How many young golf course superintendents are in the room? Do we have any? Bob Farron, raise your hand. Okay, we got a few. What do you tell a young golf course superintendent who is expected to apply fungicides and expected to keep that green thing going in order to keep his or her job? How do we give them a comfort level that they're going in the right direction with everyone else?
I think when you're first starting in this profession, Richard, there is a tremendous temptation to do everything to the max so that you can appear to be successful. I think by attending conferences and meetings, working with USGA, green section agronomists, gleaning from their knowledge, gleaning from the knowledge of older, more experienced superintendents, that you can develop the knowledge about how to manage more appropriately and avoid that temptation. I have to tell you, and I'll speak, and I was no different when I was young. Every salesperson that came through the door, you wanted to listen to them and give them time. You learn to be more selective about what you listen to as you spend more time in the business and in this profession. And we at GCSAA, the one thing that we have always been most proud of is a very robust education system for our superintendents. It's still world class, just as the USGA does a great job of that. And one disturbing trend that we see is a lot of our younger superintendents are not taking advantage of that knowledge either from the USGA or from GCSAA. I would encourage people with their golf facilities to encourage their superintendents to be a part of these organizations, to use the USGA Green Section Advisory Service, to participate in GCSAA conferences and education opportunities. That's the way that they're going to learn how to manage in a sustainable fashion. If they want to try and do it on their own, they might think they can gain all that knowledge over the internet, but it's a lot better coming from peers.
Rich, just one tag on to that. In these same remarks I made at the Carolina Hotel in February of 2010, I talked about the USGA Green Section. And I said something like it's it's the most underappreciated and unknown asset at the USGA. We talk about rules of golf, we talk about championships, but our green section is a wonderful resource to clubs and courses to draw on, to gain knowledge, to help advise and consult about turf grass. And I know Chris and Pat, as they go around to visit courses and golf superintendents, that they can be a terrific resource. And we're, I think, are beginning to take the bushel off that light, bushel basket off the light, the bright light of our USGA green section.
Thanks, sir. I'm guessing that the superintendents, they understand keeping grass alive and managing grass properly. The next question I have for everyone, is anyone in here a Greens Committee chairman or on a Greens Committee or has been on a Greens Committee in the past? Okay. The big question is, for the Greens Committee chairman, how do they convince their members or themselves that less water is better and fast and firm is better? Is there anything that the GCSAA or USGA is doing or has done that can help educate Greens committees?
Well, I've been on, I guess, 3 Greens committees. I was the Greens committee for one club I remember of, and I know, as I said, I've gone through a conversion, and I've had unique experiences and unique opportunities to do that. What I do today is every other Friday, the USGA Green section circulates electronically the Green section record. I am constantly sending that email to Greens chairman of a couple places and highlighting these articles that talk about firmness, that talk about using less water, and just trying to get them to realize there is another way to think about this. I think it's just, as I said earlier, it's drip, 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 drip. It's going to take probably 20 years to get people's opinions changed about this, but you just have to work at it as best you can.
Does anyone in the audience, Skip?
Is it possible, or what is the impact on painting the Bermuda versus actually trying to oversee? And would it be economically feasible to do it, since a lot of courses here are beginning to look into going into some sort of Bermuda?
Here in the Sandhills, most of our golf courses have a lot of resort play, out of state play, or people come down here in the fall and the spring, and unfortunately they expect the green that Skip's talking about. I'm going to let Bob talk a little bit about painting fairways. I would hope that if we can get the drip percolating quicker, then we don't ever want to think about painting fairways anymore. But Bob, will you talk a little bit about painting fairways?
It's becoming more popular again. There's no question, and especially in Arizona, we've seen a real movement away from overseeding and more toward painting, both greens and fairways both. It is certainly an alternative. When we talk about sustainability, though, there is a cost factor involved. And we talk about affordable golf. If you feel that it's imperative that you have to paint or have to color to attract the clientele, then it becomes less affordable. I'm like Richard. I would like to think that we could educate people well enough over a period of time that the painting wouldn't be necessary. But I recognize that it is a market-driven business, and we are sensitive, especially golf course superintendents are, to the fact that they want revenue to be there so that they can have a job along with their employees. So it's certainly an alternative. It's one that we're seeing used more prevalently now than overseeding in certain regions of the country. There's no question about that. The one thing that becomes an issue at points when you have this discussion about overseeding versus painting is if the Bermuda grass, if you have an extended cold period of dormancy through the winter season, and excessive car traffic or foot traffic on that turf, it becomes matted down, and most players prefer to have more of a cushion to hit off of. So you may solve the problem by coloring. you may not solve the problem. It depends on what the particular issue is at that facility. In my case, my members don't care about color, but they care about cushion. So we overseed our fairways and our roughs. Very light rates. I would argue with some people that it's costly from a standpoint of the cost of the seed, but from a water standpoint, once we get it established, we don't use that much water on it. And it does provide our members with a cushion that they want to play from. They really are not concerned with the color. We allow the color to become off color sometimes, even with the ryegrass. But it depends on what part of the country you're in. I have no transition problems in the spring. In North Carolina, you oversee, you're going to have major damage to the Bermuda turfgrass because of the competition from the rye. So it really depends very strongly on what part of the country you're in about whether overseeding is preferred or whether painting is preferred. In this part of the country, if I absolutely had to deliver green, I would lean toward painting. But there is a cost associated with it, and that's part of this affordability or sustainability question.
And the question is, when he says if he had to get to green, our symposium doesn't have a silver bullet, it's just discussion. There are a lot of little things that everyone here can take away and apply elsewhere and spread the word. But two things to me, I mean, two little things that can help combat things is stop painting grass and stop watering sand. Any other final questions for Jim and Bob? Okay, Jim, you want to?
Richard, I just want to comment. I'm not going to get off of here without commenting on what Bob Ferret and his team have done in Pinehurst number 2 with the restoration there with Core Crenshaw really taking number 2 back to the middle 40s version of what Ross envisioned, and the tremendous impact that will have, I think, on this conversation around sustainability. When you think about taking out 40 acres of turf, eliminating how many hundreds of irrigation heads, having a single row of irrigation, having some areas that water will not hit and it'll be distressed turf, and in 2014 having 2 opens there back to back. The idea of the TV commentators, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they do talk about Pinehurst number 2 in 2014. But the statement that will make to help be an advocate for sustainability, I think, will be tremendous. And I just didn't want to get away without commenting on Pinehurst number 2.
Sure. And one can only hope that the professionals will embrace that. And if the professionals embrace it, then a bunch of us will, in turn, embrace it as well. Consistent rough, you get used to consistent rough, but inconsistent lies and randomness, that'll challenge the pros. All right, I'd like to thank you guys for coming. We appreciate your discussion and your frank comments and making the time for us.